This episode was made possible thanks to generous supporters on Patreon.
Do you feel stuck when playing complex chords? What if I tell you there is an easier way? And in today's video I'm going to share with you the secret how to omit notes from the chord, so let's get started. If you've advanced enough to play complex chord beyond sevenths, then for sure you've experienced some difficulties with finding proper fingerings when it comes to 11th and 13 chords, which are close to impossible to play in their entirety over the guitar. The truth is that these chords are rarely played like that because putting all these notes together creates a harmonic overload, and therefore it makes it difficult to use it in non-solo pieces. Even the sheer fact that the 13th chord contains 7 different notes and it makes it physically impossible to play over 6-string guitar, and this is where the trick with omitting notes from the chords comes into play. As you know, the simplest chords are the triads, and they contain 3 different notes as the name suggests, and these are the root, the third and the fifth. And once we start adding more notes on top, we're actually adding different nuances, and therefore we should rather think of these notes as some sort of spice. If we get a little bit metaphysical for the sake of categorizing these spicy notes, we could start with the sevenths and say that they add a little bit of mellowness or sharpness to the chord. And in the case with minor chords, with minor 7, it makes it mellower, whereas the major 7th in a minor chord makes it sharper and not so stable anymore. With the major chords it's the other way around. With the major chord with major 7, it becomes mellow, whereas the 7th makes it rigid and turns it into what we call the dominant 7th chord. I could say that the 7ths are the most important category after the triad itself, so keep that in mind ahead in the video. The 9ths, also known as the seconds, give some kind of open quality of the chord and the sense of incompleteness. And the reason for this is that the second degree has a strong pull to resolution towards the root. And in case of the major 9th, it gives this airy feeling, whereas the flat 9 usually is used to amplify a dominant chord to make it even more rigid. The 11ths, also known as fourths, are a milder version of the 9ths, therefore they bring a little bit of openness, but smaller, because the 4th degree tends to have the same type of pulling force towards resolution, but it's not so strong. It pulls towards the 3rd degree, whereas the 9th, as we said, pulls toward the root, and therefore the pulling force is a little bit milder, and there you get this type of quality. The 13ths, also known as sixths, add either melancholy or bitterness to the chord. So if you have a major chord and want to make it darker, add a 6th. If you have a minor chord and want to make it bitter, add a 6th. Now that we know what the spicy notes do, we can start with omitting the notes, which is the process where we just get rid of some notes for the sake of playability, better voicing, or simply to alter the nuances. The first note we can omit is the 5th, and the reason for that is that it's presented very strongly in the harmonic series of the root, and therefore if we have the root we kind of have the 5th in there, and the listener's mind expects it to be there, and it almost fools itself that it hears it. So here's an example. We've got simple 7th chord, and now we remove the 5th. It's almost the same. The next note that is often omitted counterintuitively is the 3rd. And the reason for that is that when we have a chord progression and we have a key, the key itself suggests that certain chords should be major, others will be minor, and this context gives us the freedom to omit the 3rd degree whenever we don't have any other possibility. And here's a good example how this works. Or without. It's kind of very close. Regarding the 7ths, the situation is kind of tricky because, as I said in the beginning, the 7ths bring the secondary characteristics of the chord, and this is why we need to be very careful when it comes to omitting the 7th. If we have these 13th chords but with a dominant 7th, and we remove the 7th, we lose the dominant quality, and in this case you should avoid this procedure. On the other hand, if we have 13th chord but a major 7th, and we use it as tonic or subdominant, then if we remove the 7th, we won't lose so much. Anyway, I wouldn't really suggest to get rid of the 7th unless you've got a very good reason to do so, or you just deliberately don't want to have a 7th. The 9ths are something that often gets omitted when we have 11th and 13th, and they create enough harmonic content to mask the lack of 9th. Unless we have a special need to have this 9th, we can just omit it. As you can see in this chord, if we have the 9th and without the 9th, there is just very small difference. So this is the case when we just have the 13th here, we've got 7th as well, so they create this masking effect. The same is the situation with omitting the 11th. If we have 9 and 13, they create the same type of masking effect, so here's an example. Or without it. And again, a very subtle difference. A special case scenario is to omit the root. This, however, can be done only in a band setting, or at least when you have another instrument like a bass guitar that could play the root, and therefore you can just elaborate and emphasize on the other notes. Sometimes in solo pieces it could be done as well if you have enough harmonic context to suggest the root, and therefore you can just get away with it. It's important to mention that the place of the notes in the chord makes a huge importance, whether if you omit it, it will be strongly missed or barely noticeable. Generally, the voices that are on top, they stick out the most, so if you remove a note from there, it will be very noticeable. On the other hand, if the note that you omit is somewhere in the middle of the chord, it will be very subtle difference. And here's an example. We have again this 13th chord, and in this case the 9th is on the top. If we remove it, completely different voicing. It's quite audible that the note is missing. But for example, if the 9th is in the middle and then we remove it, the difference is very small. So, to make a quick recap, the first note to go is the 5th unless it's not altered, the 3rd as long as you have harmonic context to suggest it, the 9th when you have 11th and 13th, the 11th when you have 9th and 13th, the 7th only if you specifically don't need it, and the root predominantly in a band setting. So that's everything for this episode, and I hope you find it useful. Thanks for watching, and please give it a like and let me know in the comments below which is your favorite complex chord shape and why. And if you like my work, consider supporting me on Patreon on the links down in the description, where you can get access to all kinds of interesting things like tabs, audio downloads, exclusive materials, and the membership starts as low as $3 per month. And now you can also support the channel by using the YouTube membership by clicking the join button down there below. And in case you prefer to support me by a single donation, you can use the PayPal me link down in the description. If you're a first time viewer, please subscribe to my channel and click that bell notification button to get informed when I upload new video. See you next time, and remember, practice makes perfect.